Thank you, Steve. And thank you for the invitation to be here at AIM again. I'm actually going to talk about three things really quickly. The first is going to be about economics. I have to do that because I actually have a PhD piled higher and deeper in that field. I then want to talk about demographics because I've been thinking a lot about that because I now have a Medicare card and a senior Charlie card. And then I want to talk a little bit about histrionics, and we'll come back to the public unions on that. The first is that playing up on the theme that Steve began us with in terms of regeneration, I went back and I looked at the numbers in terms of employment growth in the Commonwealth all the way back to the 1940s. So we're talking 70 years of data. It turns out that the last decade, 2000 through 2009, is the only decade in which we ended up with fewer jobs at the end of the decade than at the beginning of the decade. Even when we think about the times when the dot-coms imploded and financial services fell apart, we have always created at least 200,000 jobs in a decade, and as many as 500,000 in the decade of the 1980s. In the past decade, from January 2000 through December of 2009, we lost 155,000 jobs. We lost 4.7% of our total employment. So that if you were to look over the long term, you'd say, we have just come through a period that makes us look a little bit like Michigan, where I grew up in Detroit, than the Commonwealth that you think about today. Indeed, between 2001 and 2009, Massachusetts had the worst employment trend, was fourth worst in terms of employment trend nationwide. Only Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois did not fare as well as we did. We lost 4.7% of our jobs. Indeed, it wasn't a good decade for lots of states. There were 28 states that lost jobs, but we were the fourth worst. The good news is that we're starting to come back. During the recession that began in December '07, we have actually lost fewer jobs than the nation as a whole. Nationally, we lost about 5.9% of our jobs through March of this year, 2010. In Commonwealth, we've lost about 4.2%. What's also neat is that some of our sectors have performed significantly better than the rest of the country. The healthcare sector has done very well. The education sector that I come out of and Steve comes out of has done very well. Manufacturing has actually done better as well. In 2008, we published a report based on data that we had collected through the end of 2007, just before the recession took place. We ended up interviewing over 700 manufacturers in the Commonwealth. We surveyed them, and then we actually talked face-to-face with the CEOs or managing directors or owner-managers of 104 of those firms. What was staggering was to realize how much manufacturing is actually coming back in the Commonwealth. It's still the fourth largest employer in the state. When we asked the 700 firms across all sectors of manufacturing what their plans were over the next 5 years, over 60% of them said they expected to not only expand output, but employment. Now, as a matter of fact, the recession hits. We've lost about 40,000 jobs altogether from the peak when we were looking at it. But in a forecast that my colleague Alan Clayton Matthews will be bringing out next week through the New England Economic Partnership, after we get through this recession, there is good reason to believe that manufacturing will begin to grow again. And that's going to be very important, not only because it is such a large job creator, and it has the second largest payroll of any sector in the economy, second to healthcare, and not only because, as a matter of fact, in terms of output, manufacturing has been growing since the late 1990s as a percentage share of gross state product. Manufacturing is key. And we have to get more and more people to realize it. The key problem that we found in our study is not that we'd be losing jobs in manufacturing, but because of the aging of the workforce, we will have to find nearly 100,000 new workers to fulfill the job requirements in the manufacturing sector. And that means not only will we have to have, of course, very good four-year schools like Northeastern and UMass Boston, but we're going to have to think about how we make community colleges that work, vocational high schools that work. And we're going to have to convince young people that, in fact, a good job paying very good wages in manufacturing is a future they can look forward to, because right now that's not quite there. Which brings me to demographics. We've recently done a study for a wonderful group called Encore Careers. That's what people like Steve and I are going to do when we finish this career, but we're still young enough to do something other than play golf, and we want to do something else. Encore Careers asked us if we would take a look at what the demographic projection would look like between 2008 and 2018, 8 years from now, and what the job picture would look like. The numbers are staggering. If you look at all adults 18 and over, they're all born already, so we don't have to worry about fertility rates. And if you assume current immigration rates, and you assume that a huge meteorite will not strike the planet, there'll be about 21.9 million additional adults age 18 and over by 2018. 95% of that additional population of adults will be over the age of 54. And 2/3 of them will be over 65. And the reason for that was that between 1946 and 1964, the baby boom generation, we actually had 20 million more babies born in the United States than we would have under normal fertility rates. And if you think back, as I think several of us at this table could do, we converted the entire American economy around kids. We suburbanized not only because people wanted to move out of central cities, but because they wanted a backyard with a play set for their kids. Disneyland was created, followed by Disney World. We began to have expansion in summer camps. We began to have explosion in all kinds of sports programs that many of us participated in as kids. Those kids are now going to be in their 60s and their 70s. And we're going to have to convert the economy over again to figure out how to use them creatively if we're going to fill our needs. In fact, in our study, despite the fact that we have such high unemployment today, we project that by 2018, at current labor force participation rates, we're going to have between 5 and 6 million jobs that will need to be filled that we will not be able to fill. Indeed, this man bites dog story today has been so successful that within the first 2 weeks of our report showing up, it appeared in over 300 newscasts, newspapers, TV, radio, nationwide, even in the Ethiopian news of Addis Ababa. That is also going to pose a serious problem here in Massachusetts, because the aging of the population is even more rapid here than elsewhere. That 21.9 million additional adults over 18 only contains 900,000 adults between 18 and 54. Those are the people who make up the core of the workforce. Those are the people who make up the core of the tax-paying public. We will be competing with every other state for those 900,000 to augment people like us. How do we compete for them and keep them here? Obviously, we need to have the jobs. Obviously, we need to have the amenities. But we also have to worry about the cost of living in the Commonwealth and what that means for young people when they make a choice, as one of my graduate students just told me this morning in email, that she's picking up and moving to Raleigh-Durham because it's cheaper. That is going to be something we have to worry about. Finally, histrionics. If you saw the Boston Globe yesterday morning, you saw the latest announcements of the Boston Teachers Union fighting our superintendent on all the reforms she wants to make. Last year we saw firefighters who are getting disability pay while they're winning bodybuilding contests. We had police officers fighting the governor on civilian guards at work sites. I come out of a trade union background. I'm genetically tied to the union movement. My father, bless his soul, was vice president of the Auto Workers Union, UAW. I was the founder of the only student employee union of undergraduates in the history of the United States at Michigan, when we fought hard to raise wages from 75 cents to the minimum wage in Michigan, because a law had been passed which said that working for the University of Michigan, my alma mater, was such an honor that busing dishes deserved to be paid a third less than the minimum wage. And I was a member of the Mass Teachers Union for 11 years when I taught at UMass Boston, and I traveled to 30 states for the union trying to talk to them about what we were doing. Last summer, I wrote an article called Policy Advice, Is There a Future for Public Sector Unions? And I argued that the unions were going to face this, the public sector unions were going to face the same problem of my union, the UAW. I worked for 3 years on a plant, Ford plant, building planned obsolescence into Ford carburetors in 1960s. I built carburetors for the wonderful Mustang. Mm-hmm. But my union at that time had 1.5 million members. It has 430,000 members today. And part of the reason why that union is so weak today is because the leaders of the auto industry did not make very smart decisions, nor did the union. And so the union itself weakened itself, and my argument is the public employee unions are weakening their own members by the stands they're taking. The need for reform is growing so much so that it isn't just groups like AIM or business groups or right-wing groups that are attacking unions, but the attacks are coming from progressives, from the Boston Foundation, from groups in the inner city who are saying, this doesn't work anymore. And so one of the things that we need to do to make this state work better, particularly in terms of operating the state, is we need to have an entire new dialogue, and we need to get more and more people sitting down and thinking about what would a new labor management relations look like in the 21st century, one in which the union's role is certainly to support its members, but it's equally important that it support improvements in productivity, improvements in quality, improvements in innovation. That is the role of the union every bit as much as it is the company. My father negotiated most of the contracts with the General Motors Corporation as director of the GM department from 1968 through 1980 when he retired. My father's favorite line was, I never liked negotiating with a company that was losing money. If the union doesn't take advantage of the fact that they will not survive if we don't have better schools, they will not survive if they demand or arbitrators give them contracts that break the public bank, that this will hurt their members every bit as much as it hurts the Commonwealth. So we have business to take care of. We have to convince people of the truth, the rebuilding of the manufacturing sector as a very important sector in our economy. We have to deal with the demographics of the baby boom generation and the baby bust that will leave us competing for young people. And we have to begin to think about all the reforms we need in state government, including massive reforms of how we work with the trade union movement. Thank you.